Might it be the case that Joseph Biden will become a Franklin Roosevelt, even if it's understood that he certainly hasn't done it yet? And I think the answer to that question is yes, he might. And why? Because these things have nothing to do, these questions of how far a president will or will not go, have very little to do with the individual, or for that matter, the political party. What makes the thing happen or not are the larger social conditions that force certain courses of action and block others. So let's take a look at that. Two things are crucial to understand why Roosevelt did what he did and why Biden hasn't and probably won't unless similar conditions develop that are not here in the United States yet. Let me explain. Two social conditions confronted Mr. Roosevelt that made him act the way he did. One I have mentioned, the collapse of the capitalist system after 1929. It was severe, it was unanticipated. Economists, politicians, academics, people thought that America was an exceptional place where everybody would do better year after year, generation after generation, that the problems of capitalism had been solved in the 19th century, and that the 20th century would be spectacularly growing. They weren't prepared for the collapse of 1929. They didn't know what to do. They were disorganized. They were depressed. It was a cataclysmic break. In a short amount of time, a quarter of the labor force was unemployed. That means every American family had mother or father or sister or brother or cousin or uncle out of work, leaning on the others who were worried about their jobs. Nobody had prepared the culture. You really have to go back and read the novels of John Steinbeck or all the others who wrote about the catastrophe. That was one condition. We have serious economic problems now, but they aren't quite at the level that Mr. Roosevelt confronted. But could they get there? You bet. And I will come back to that. But we're not there yet. But there's a second, even more important difference in the social conditions of Mr. Roosevelt compared to Mr. Biden. When the capitalism collapsed in 1929, the American political consciousness went to the left. There was a spectacular growth of criticism, not just of the unemployment, not just of the poverty, not just of the suffering of families and children and all the rest. There was that, but there was something more than that. There was a recognition that the system was the problem. And therefore, people decided to take extraordinary steps. Millions joined labor unions, the CIO. These were people who had never been in a union before, whose parents had never been in a union. They knew nothing about unions, but they were bitter and angry, and they were willing to join with other workers to confront the people who represented capitalism to them, the bosses, the owners, the operators, the corporate leaders, the big bankers, you know. And so there was masses, millions, who joined labor movements. But even more to the point, millions joined either one or the other of two socialist parties and of the American Communist Party, whose membership, whose social influence, whose spirit at that time was more expansive, more powerful, more wide-ranging than at any time before or since in the history of American socialism and American communism. And finally, there was a coalition a coalition of cooperation between the Communist Party, both socialist parties, and the CIO. They worked together. They had disagreements, they had fights, but they had a powerful, effective coalition. And they went to the President Roosevelt and they basically said to him, you have to help the mass of people. You have to. If you do, you will become a hero. And if you don't, we won't vote for you. And we, communists, socialists, and CIO, we control millions of votes. You won't be elected dog catcher. It didn't have to be said. Mr. Roosevelt was a smart politician. He understood the message. And to make a long story short, that's why we have the New Deal. Roosevelt had to respond. He had no choice. He was forced to by the push from below demanding Social Security, unemployment compensation, a minimum wage, and federal jobs, and to make corporations and the rich pay for it, because the government couldn't. With millions out of work, with businesses belly up, the government wasn't receiving taxes. It couldn't function. So the money had to come from the rich and the corporations because nobody else could have paid for it. So that's why it happened. Now we go to Mr. Biden. He doesn't have that. First of all, the system hasn't crashed quite so badly. Crashed a lot, could crash more, but for the moment, not quite so bad. So the Democrats are hoping they can slither through without having to do what Roosevelt did. But more important, again, is the key difference. There is now nothing comparable, politically speaking, to the coalition of the CIO, the two socialist parties, and the Communist Party. The two socialist parties and the Communist Party exist, but they're so weak and so small, they have no appreciable social influence these days, with the possible exception of the DSA, which has been growing quickly, and I'll come back to that. The labor movement is on a 50-year decline. It once represented a third of American laborers. Today it represents barely 10%, and in the private sector it represents 6.5%. That's all. So the coalition that made it happen under Roosevelt doesn't exist now, and therefore there is no comparable pressure on Mr. Biden, and that makes all the difference. He has the space and the time to do very little, a pale imitation of Roosevelt, and hope maybe that's enough, because there isn't the dog nipping at his heels to do more.